Building Fluency in Grades 4 through 8. Our learning target is I can help my students build fluency while reading. We know that fluency is one of the big 5 skills that students need to become skilled readers. It's the big 5 skills of early literacy. These start here with phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear that and understand that words are made up of individual sounds. Once children understand that, they can move to phonics, and that's where we take those sounds and we link them to a symbol or a letter. This is where we build in syllable knowledge. We're able to decode words, rhyming words, building on up to any type of print information here. Once we have those 2 things down pat, we need to be able to read the passage with some fluency. There's several parts that go into fluency, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the fluency builds once we have these parts and we understand the words that we're reading. That's when comprehension can happen. And of course, comprehension is our ultimate goal. Fluency can be defined as the ability to read a text accurately, quickly, and with expression, which is also called prosody. Fluency is a key skill to becoming a strong reader. It's that bridge between word recognition, the phonics and the phonemic awareness, and comprehension. So it bridges the gap. So sometimes when we see students who are struggling with comprehension, we just need to sit down and read with them for a moment and see how their fluency is. A student that is very choppy, reading word by word, or that student that doesn't stop at the periods or pause at the commas, that can impede and slow their comprehension down. Here are some terms that we need to know. The first one is automaticity. This is when words are recognized immediately. You don't have to decode the words or sound out the different pieces and parts of a word. You see the word and you're able to know it and say it immediately. Fluency, again, is the ability to read text quickly, accurately, and with expression, or that prosody that we talk about. I want you to caution you about this word quickly. Fluency needs to be, words need to be read quick enough to keep the comprehension going, but fluency is not a race. So sometimes when we talk to students about fluency and building fluency and timed readings and those kinds of things, they interpret it as read it as fast as I can. Well, we know that when a student just blurts out all the words, lots of times there's careless mistakes, but there's also typically very little comprehension that happens. The purpose of fluency is to build that comprehension. So if we're not being able to comprehend, then we need to continue to work on fluency. Prosody, I call this the music of the way we talk and the music of books, the way it sounds when we read. This is where your voice goes up or down depending on what is going on in the story. If you have an exclamation point, you read it with some excitement. If you have a question mark, your pitch goes up at the end of the word. We pause at the commas and stop at the periods. And all of those pieces together is what makes prosody, is what makes that expression while reading, which helps and helps to build comprehension. And then of course we have the rate. Again, it's the speed of reading, but it's not how fast you read, it's how accurately and quickly and with expression. So all those pieces have to be a part of fluency, not just one or the other. So you can go on the Symbaloo and download this presentation, and all of these links are live, so you'll be able to get these and pull up these charts if you would like to. So this is the Hasbrook and Tyndall oral fluency chart. It's typically the one that that's used in most situations. There are other ones out there, but if you look at them, they're all within just a couple of words of each other for the expectations. Now, the way we read this chart is we look at this 50th percentile. The 50th percentile is considered that average student. So the average first grader at in the middle of the year, in the winter of their first grade year, the expectation is that they are able to read 29 words correct per minute. And you notice this has the little asterisk down here, and the C stands for correct, so it's words read correct per minute. It's not just how many words you read, but it's how many words you read correctly. You notice that by the spring, by the end of their first grade year, that number doubles. Take a look here between the summer, between the end of the school year and the beginning of the next school year, the expectation drops, and it does that with every grade level. And it does that, of course, to account for that summer slide. When they're in school, they are exposed and have text of some sort in front of them all day long, every day, and so, of course, that fluency is going to build there. But then during the summer, we hope they read some, but we know that they're not exposed to text all day long, every day, like they are while they're in school. So that's the reason that you'll see that drop. It's built in for that summer slide. Now, if you'll notice on down here, this chart goes through 6th grade. There are some charts that go through 8th grade. This one happens to stop at 6th grade, but if you'll notice the expectation for 5th grade, the average student should be reading 146 words correct per minute, and so should the average 6th grader by the end of the school year. They tell us that when you read a complex text, if you can read at about 150 words correct per minute, you will be able to understand that 150 words correct per minute in a complex text is typically what is needed in order to have comprehension, or to be able to comprehend the text that you're reading. Now, if you take a look here, you see that in the highest 10th percentile of your students in your class, those students may be able to read 204 words correct per minute. And then if you in your lowest 10%, your students may read 91 words per minute. Now, if you do an assessment on a student and see how many words correct they're reading, and it's way below the expectations in your grade level, then take a look and see where that fell and what grade level, and you kind of see about how far back you need to go for the instructional text that you work with while you're working to build fluency. So, how do we build fluency? One of the ways is through repeated readings. Most of the ways that we work on fluency and build fluency, it's very simple. It's an easy process, but it has a powerful pack when you do it on a regular basis. It's very powerful. So repeated readings is 0.75 on the Hattie's effect size graph, and we know that 0.4 is where you get a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction. 0.75 says that we get almost that 2 years worth of growth for 1 year worth of instruction. And so it's a simple but a very effective way to help students with lots of different pieces between building vocabulary and building confidence, but also in building fluency. So we're going to take it one step further and talk about timed repeated readings and then charting those numbers in a fluency chart. I'm going to show you the fluency chart in just a moment, but keep in mind that your pre-test and your post-test should be an on-grade level passage. If you've got a student that you're working through the MTSS process with, you'll know that they need on-grade level passages to check for rate of improvement. But when we work with students to build their fluency, we need to find their instructional or their Lexile level, and that's the level that we work on during the instructional time and the practice time. And then at the end of the time, or every so often, we're going to check an on-grade level passage to see, hopefully, the week-to-week instructional passages, the practice time, hopefully that is growing and increasing, and we want to see that growth and that increase happen also on the grade level passages. So we're hoping that it will lend itself and move on over as well. So where might you get some fluency passages? There's a couple of choices here. There are lots of places to get them. Lots of times, like our in elementary school, our Journey series has some fluency passages a lot of reading series do, but also this website called achievethecore.org. If this is a website you're not familiar with, you want to go on there and check it out. There are lots and lots of great lessons. There are math lessons, there are ELA lessons, but there's a section devoted specifically to fluency. And in that section you'll find there's 3 different areas. There's an area, there's actually more than this, but for our purposes there are 3 different areas. So we have the 2nd and 3rd grade sets of passages, and in those there are typically between 35 and 40 passages in each one of these sets. So you can get your own grade level passage there. And then if your student is reading a year below where your grade level, then you can back up a year to do the practice passages that you do during the week. Now, you can build fluency with the passages that you are working on currently in your class. So if you're a science or social studies teacher and you have some passages that you're working on to build some information within that content, you can take a piece of one of those stories or passages and use that to build some fluency for repeated readings as well. In K through 5, we have reading A to Z, and all K through 5 teachers should have access to that. There are lots of reading passages on there as well. So this is the timed reading fluency chart, and it's a live link, so you can click on here and get this chart. Once you have it, then you can kind of manipulate it to fit the needs of your students. For example, if you're teaching a lower grade and you don't need the numbers to go up quite this high, you can spread the numbers out. Instead of it jumping 5 words correct per minute each time here, you can make it jump 10, whatever fits the needs in your classroom. So the first thing we're going to do in this chart is we're going to write the title of our story, and we're going to read each story 3 times here. So we're going to write our title in here, and then we're going to set our timer for 1 minute. You're going to have that student read the story, and you're going to make just tally marks for mistakes. You don't have to code the mistakes or write down specifics. Just make a tally mark for every mistake that they make. Now, lots of times if you are reading or working with a student that makes careless errors, this process helps them a lot, because what happens is that you're going to have them count the number of words they read, and then any mistakes they made, they have to subtract that number from the number that they read, and students don't like to do that. So lots of times they'll kind of be watching out of the corner of their eye, and if they see you start to make a tally mark because they've made a mistake, it makes them go back and self-correct. So if they self-correct, you don't count that as an error. That will show up. If they make lots of self-corrections, that will show up in the fact that they won't get as far in the passage or as many words read in that minute. So that will show up that way. Again, you're going to count the words read correctly. So you're going to let the student, or you're going to count the number of the whole number of words read, and then you're going to subtract any mistakes that they made. We're going to list the date that took place and the score here. Let your student or yourself, whatever, color in or fill in the chart here so that they can see how they're doing. Then you're going to repeat the process for this time number 2. So on day 1, we're going to complete timed readings number 1 and number 2. And then we complete timed read number 3 on the next day. Now, if your schedule doesn't allow for that and you end up doing a timed reading on each day, that's fine. The goal would be here to get the repeated reading and the timed readings and build that process up to help students build that fluency. So that part is fine. I do recommend, if it's possible, not to do the different timed readings like over a weekend. It's best to do it back to back if it's at all possible to do. The passages on Achieve the Core also have comprehension questions with them, so you could work on this on Monday and Tuesday, or Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, depending on how it works in your classroom, and then they could work on the comprehension questions on Thursday and Friday. So you could use that passage all week long for several different purposes. So the students are going to be looking to see that this number grows. They want to see that number 2 is bigger than number 1 and number 3 is bigger than number 2. And if you're able to do the 2 timed readings, the number 1 and number 2, on the first day and then come back the second day to do the third one, typically that number 3 goes down just a little bit from that second read, but it's typically used still higher than that number 1 read, which is normal. That's expected. But what you as the teacher will be looking for is that time number 1 increases. So you're going to be looking at this first time that the student is exposed to this text. Is that number increasing? Because if that number is increasing, then you know that each time they see a text for the first time, they're able to access more words correct per minute than they had been. And that's our goal, where we want them to be. Of course, don't forget to always go back and check a grade level passage and make sure that they're transferring that growth over to a grade level passage as well. All right, so I know you're listening to this on a video, but I'd like for you to work along with me here. I want you to read. And so I'm going to time you for 30 seconds. Typically you do students for 1 minute, but it's hard to get a passage long enough for for adults to read in a minute and still be able to see it on the actual screen here. So I'm going to time for 30 seconds. When I say begin, I would like for you to read out loud. So I would like for you to, I know you're sitting there, but I'd like for you just to read out loud at a normal pace, your normal pace. If you make a mistake, make sure you make a self-correction. And when I say stop, then we're going to count the number of words that you read. All right, so this is the passage that we're looking at, and you see the number of words out here to the side, so it makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to go and count each and every word. All right, so again, I'd like for you to read out loud. Are you ready? Begin. All right, good. Stop. Count the numbers read, the number of words read correctly, and jot that number down. Okay? Pause the video if you need to finish counting those if you haven't quite gotten that down. So you've got that number written down, and that's the number of words you read correctly in 30 seconds. Again, when you do this with your students, you will be doing this for a 1 minute read. It will be 1 minute, okay? So we're going to do a second read, okay? So you're going to start back at the beginning just like you did last time. You're going to read that same passage and see how far you can get on the second read. Again, it's going to be 30 seconds, the same amount of time. Again, I'm not going to ask you to read out loud. All right, are you ready? Begin. Good, and stop. Go ahead and count the additional words that you read and jot that number down. So take a look at those two numbers. Typically, we read between 5 and 10 words more correct per minute this on our second read. Is that what you found happened in your case? All right. Now you notice when I had you start here, I said ready, begin. If you have a student that being timed makes them nervous, or they're not, they just get anxious with that, you don't have to say anything. You can just say, tell them to begin when they're ready. And as soon as they start, you start your timer. You could do it that way as well. Sometimes that's needed as well. Again, don't forget to go back and do that grade level check so that you can make sure that they're transferring that growth, hopefully, that they're getting from their instructional or their Lexile level passages onto that grade level passage. That's, of course, our ultimate goal. Our learning target, again, is I can help my students build fluency while reading. So let's look at some characteristics of a fluent reader versus a disfluent reader. So a fluent reader reads the words correctly. They are taking a look and figuring out different like syllable patterns or vowel patterns. They're rhyming words. Those things are making sense to them, and they're putting all those things together. They do self-correct, so they're monitoring their reading as they read. A disfluent reader is that reader who is sounding out the word, lots of times having to sound out each letter in the word, and so of course once they do that for a few words in the first sentence, they have no idea what that first sentence is even saying. If they do that continually throughout the paragraph, they're not going to know what the paragraph is, which of course leads to no understanding of the whole passage. A fluent reader's rate is fast, but again, it's not too fast. Remember, it has to be that quickly enough, but the student also still needs to be able to continue to read accurately and with prosody when they're building that speed or that rate. Sometimes when you're reading a story out loud, there are times that you slow down your rate or speed up your rate, depending on if you're reading a fiction text where somebody is saying something or doing something, or if it's a text where you need to slow down so you can get comprehension. But they're monitoring themselves. They're checking out. A disfluent reader, again, is just really focusing on decoding those words. A fluent reader will read with good expression and good enthusiasm, so they know when to slow down, when to speed up. They know when to change the pitch or the tone of their voice depending on what's happening in that story. Your disfluent reader is very monotone, very flat, one volume, one tone, and they're not changing up, which means they're not having a lot of understanding of the story, because you can tell when the understanding starts happening because they start putting that prosody that we were talking about earlier into their story as they're reading. A fluent reader chunks words into phrases. Just like when we speak and when we talk, we say a few words together, we phrase them, we scoop those phrases together. When students are reading out loud, they need to do that as well. It helps our brains to understand what it is that we're reading. They definitely need to pause at the commas and stop at the periods, but there are other times in a sentence that you just take a natural pause. There are other times in the story that it's not a time within these 2 or 3 words that you would take a pause. And so fluent readers know the difference between when they need to take a pause and when they don't. They're also, of course, stopping between those sentences to make sure that they're, that they're monitoring their comprehension if they're able to do that. The disfluent reader reads word by word. They're also the readers that don't stop at the periods, they don't pause at the commas. I know you've listened to a student read where on the one line of text in this book, it stops, the period happens 2 or 3 words before the end of the text, and the student doesn't stop at the period, they stop at the end of the text, and so they run right through that period into the next 2 or 3 words of the next sentence. And if you stopped a student right then and said, okay, what's going on, they would probably struggle to be able to tell you because it didn't make sense. They didn't pause and stop at the right times for it to make sense. Now, there are lots of ways to work on fluency. We start this in kindergarten. So if you have a student that's not quite ready to work on connected text on a passage in fluency, they need to back up a little bit more, we can have several options. And so in kindergarten, when students start learning a few letters, we start holding letters up and timing them for a minute to see how many letters can you say in a minute. We need this process to build and become automatic so that they can use that information when they're going to sound words out and look at words, and to the point that hopefully they recognize the word and they recognize the phrase or whatever quickly enough to continue to read. Once the student kind of gets those letters down pat and we introduce the sound that goes with that letter, then we might hold the letter up and just ask them to tell us the sound. We're going to time that for a minute over some periods of time to see are they able to get more sounds per minute than what they were. Then we're going to move to words. Lots of times we see people using high frequency words. How quickly can you say the words on this list, the Dolch word list, the Fry word list? You can use all of those pieces. You can then build into looking at word parts like syllables. We see in lower grades we do assessments where we have students read nonsense words. Well, nonsense words are really just syllables, because when you put them together then they become a real word. But if students could read nonsense words or syllables quickly enough, then they'll be able to also put them together and build that ability to be able to put them together so that they can read it quickly as well. We move then into phrases, and so one great thing to try is Fry phrases. If you go onto our Symbaloo under Balanced Literacy Resources, you'll see under Word Development there, you'll see a whole entire section with Fry phrases. And so we have them in several different areas. So we have them on a list, so they could just go down and read the list of Fry phrases. We have them where they're fixed to be printed out on cards, so it's on individual cards, so you can flip the cards. We also have them on a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is set up so that it will automatically advance to the next slide. When we work with this with students, we ask them to say the phrase twice. The first time they say it, I tell them they kind of sound like a robot because they're checking for accuracy. They're making sure that they're saying the words correctly. And then I tell them the second time you read it as if you were talking to your friend. The phrases will flip through relatively quickly so that they know that they need to say it twice, each phrase twice, but they need to do that quickly so that they'll be ready for the next one. Once we get into that, then you can have sentences. You can have them practice reading sentences. What's great is if you have students, or even if students, working with fluency helps our struggling reader and it helps our high readers. This is a process, a skill that we can build in all different levels of readers. If you have a story or a passage coming up next week, and you want to practice some fluency even with the whole group or with a small group of students, you could take some phrases directly from the passage that you're working on next week and have them practice those phrases several different times throughout this week. That will help them build fluency, but then it also lays that second effect of it will help them be able to read more fluently the story or the passage that you're working on next week, which will aid in the comprehension of that. And then, of course, we want to move all the way up here to connected text. And again, this doesn't stop here. This says second and third. That's kind of where you would work towards getting and starting that process, but it doesn't stop there. It can continue on throughout. We talked a little bit about prosody and about the music of our language, the music, the way it sounds. Oral reading requires that we are aware of the stress that we put on the different phrases and different words in different parts of the passage, our pitch, our tone, our volume, the rhythm, the way it sounds. It typically comes very naturally in conversation, but it needs specific, explicit instruction when it comes to reading. So you can do this a couple of different ways. So remember, this is one part of fluency. So sometimes we need to break the parts of fluency up before we can build to the timed readings. And if that's the case, or if that's the specific issue of a student or a group of students you're working with, you could work on just specifically on prosody. So one way to do that is to think about characters that the student knows. Now, we're going to look at Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and your students may not know those characters. If not, choose some characters that they know how that character normally sounds, or what it sounds, how their attitude is about things. So, for example, the sentence is, "I have to go home and cook dinner." Well, if I was the dwarf Grumpy and I said this sentence, it might sound like, "I have to go home and cook dinner." But if I was the dwarf Happy, it might sound like, I have to go home and cook dinner. Or if I was Sleepy, it might sound like, oh, I have to go home and cook dinner. Once students are able to do that, you know that they're monitoring for understanding and they're able to apply that knowledge in the whole text to be able to build that comprehension. Again, being our ultimate goal. Another great way to build fluency, and this is a fun and easy way to do with a whole group, it takes less than a minute, 2 minutes to do it with your group, is to put this up on the board. Put something up on the board, some phrases that they know, and have them practice reading it, but including reading the punctuation. So if you will, I'm going to ask that you read this aloud with me. So if you will, read this out loud, and we're going to pause and read the punctuation, make the punctuation work for this. So are you ready? Read it with me. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So just put the punctuation in different points and using some information or some context like the alphabet, something that's very simple and easy for them so they can focus their whole attention on the punctuation, not on the actual letters or words that they're reading. Let's read this one. Are you ready? Read it out loud with me. Here we go. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And so this is just a real quick thing that you could do with your students. You don't have to use the alphabet. You could use any passage or any sets of phrases when you work on the fry phrases. And we typically recommend that to be less than 5 minutes of your class time. But when you work on the fry phrases, stop every so often and say, okay, let's read this phrase and pretend like it has an exclamation point at the end. How would it sound? Or let's read this phrase and pretend like it has a question mark at the end. How would it sound? And that way they can keep practicing that process with the hopes that they'll take that in turn and put it into the passages that they're reading to help build that comprehension. Another great way is through Reader's Theater. If you Google Reader's Theater scripts, you will come up with lots and lots of options, but you don't have to use something else. You can use what you're using in your class every single day. You can use the story that you're going to read. You can use the science text or the social studies text that you're working on. You can make a Reader's Theater out of literally just about anything. You can do it with poems, with short stories, whatever you happen to be working on. For example, one year with the AIG group that I had, we worked on the preamble to the Constitution, and we created it and made it into a Reader's Theater. Well, that sets a purpose for rereading, because sometimes you have students who are a little reluctant to reread something. This sets the purpose for rereading. It also sets the purpose and provides an experience to read aloud, and then it provides that experience for reading with that prosody that we're looking for. Students will automatically want to practice it if they're going to be reading it out loud to their small group or to their class or to a group, whichever group they might be reading it to. It gives them purpose for rereading it so that they can get better and then they can practice and that they know they're going to do well on the story. Again, our learning target is I can help my students build fluency while reading. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to contact me anytime. I'll be glad to help you in any way that I can. Don't forget to register on STAR and notify me when you complete the questions so that I can mark you as present so that you will be able to get credit in STAR for this workshop. Thanks, guys.